one of them still lives right up the street, and he's frequently on the radio. They call it Fireball Friday, and he talks about all kinds of stuff. But of course, about the studio down in Texas and Buddy Holly, and all the different albums and the genesis of different recordings and stuff. But yeah, it's cool. He lives right up the street.
I feel like it's probably a small enough town that you two must cross paths from time to time.
Well, I haven't seen him yet, but the guy across the street knows him quite well. And the guy across the street seems to know everybody. When I say I live across the street from Albert and Sandra, everybody's like, oh, I know where you live. Everybody seems to know them. Anyway, so we're gonna do a little front yard concert. We have a little 3-piece cover band called the Raton 3. And I'm quite excited about it, actually, because we've learned about 40 songs. I've really had to grow as a vocalist to sing all these songs that I've always loved. And we're doing everything basically from Johnny Rivers to Nirvana. So as long as it's in the 20th century, we're doing it. Nothing past the year 2000.
No 19th century hits.
No.
No ragtime.
This is the breadth a little bit. Blood and Roses by Smithereens. Really great song. And then there's an old Lovin' Spoonful song that Mama Cass sings. Didn't want to have to do it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song. And we've learned that too. So the breadth is pretty far.
I like to hear that you're still not only expanding your repertoire, but also your singing abilities. What, like in that world, in these songs that you were choosing, what would you say was the most difficult for you?
Ooh, Sentimental Lady wasn't easy.
Bob Welsh, I want to say.
Yes. And then Learning Black by Pearl Jam. Partly because it has to be emotional, but his moves are very precise on his melody, and they change a little, because the second verse grows, and well, it climaxes, and stuff. So plus, it's Eddie Vedder, so I got to do it right. I got to do it, but I also have to do it so it sounds like me. But yes, I would say those were challenging. We're also doing Hot Burrito #1, Graham Parsons. And he's so vulnerable, and, he sings pretty softly, but it's a nice little melody. It's a little tricky. You may be sweet and nice, but that won't keep you warm at night. Yeah, anyway. And these are all just songs we've loved. We learned a Jayhawk song. I didn't even know it, but it was a really favorite of my husband's. So I thought, well, I'll learn it if I like it. And I heard it and I was like, oh yeah, I like it. I'll learn it.
Eddie Vedder is an interesting one because when you're dealing with a vocalist that's as, I guess, singular as he is, that sings in like such a, I mean, obviously singular at the time. Now there's millions of bands that like imitate Eddie Vedder, but this is always the trickiest part of doing a cover, right? Is how true you stay to the original, and it's probably difficult to sing a Pearl Jam song and not do an Eddie Vedder impression. A
little bit, yeah. But each one of us has to come into our own moans. Oh, and all I wanted was. You got to do your own moan. There's no way you can moan like Eddie Vedder.
You got to earn that moan, and you earn that moan through hard living.
Yeah. Things to do when you retire.
So you've pretty consistently played music.
I have. I've usually kept some kind of band, some kind of way. When I was teaching high school art in the desert, which I did up until last year in March when they said the kids didn't have to wear masks anymore. And I'm like, you know what? I'm 67 years old, overweight, never got COVID yet, and I've been teaching 200 kids a day. But now you want them to come without their masks? I just was like, I can't do it. It just seemed like And of course, one of my teachers that I worked with has now had COVID 3 times. And the most recent time, she was the most sick. So I'm really glad I'm out of there. I still have to live, and I want to live it.
It's incredibly. I also have had COVID 3 times. I have this cold that I'm dealing with right now. I checked and it's not COVID, but I think that's something that most people don't realize who haven't had COVID multiple times is it doesn't get any easier.
Yeah, that's what I understand. That breaks my heart because people I'd known who just had it once got pretty sick. There were a couple of parents, students of mine or grandparents of students of mine that passed away from COVID while we were in school and teaching. It was very difficult.
Getting back to my close to 2019 travel levels for work. So, I've been on about 8 planes this year so far. And suddenly in the past 6 months, I feel like the weirdo for being, one of 5 people wearing a mask on a plane.
I would be right there. I might even, if I had to fly, I'd probably buy one of those little respirator things. The plastic, just because you're right there, you're stuck with them. You're all in their air, and people are, and everyone who's there is traveling from all these different places, and with the variants and all that kind of thing. I just don't want to be a part of that.
Were you doing live performing before the pandemic?
Usually at least once a year. I would go to the Bay Area because I had a regular band in the Bay Area. Just a little over a year ago, the guitarist from that band, though, passed away. So now that option kind of isn't really there, and I'm nowhere near the Bay Area anymore. At least when I was in California, in Southern California, teaching in the desert, it was just like I'd go up for a few days with my sister, and I'd stay with the bass player, and he had an extra room in his house and all that. Now that's kind of not an option. And so I still love performing, and I really love singing. Luckily, my husband's really good friend, who's the carpenter on our remodel for our 1960s house, he plays great guitar. And my husband plays drums. So we have a 3-piece. I'll send you some stuff if you want me to.
I mean, aside from the cover bands, are you writing music still?
Well, actually, it's going to take a really long time because I started writing my memoirs. And I'm only 14 pages into it. So I've got a long ways to go. But there's a lot that happened in my life. I was in an interesting point in history. My family's history is interesting. And I definitely grew up very engaged with social change and social cultural events that were going on during my lifetime. I was of my time. And so I'm just trying to chronicle that, the mid-century, time. For instance, I went and helped occupy Alcatraz in the middle of San Francisco Bay with the Native American activists when I was 16. So, I've done some things. Yeah.
I'm in New York now, but I'm from Fremont originally, so I'm very familiar.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
very familiar with the area.
I also saw the Sex Pistols. So there's a lot to tell,
The club that you performed at, which was, it was gone well before I was of age to be able to go to shows. That was one of the final Sex Pistols shows there, right? I mean, they broke up in San Francisco. Yeah.
With the Avengers opening.
I had Penelope on the show a while back.
Oh, she's awesome. Her and I did an art show together last summer with Judy Gittleson from the Inflatable Boy Clams. We're all alumni of the San Francisco Art Institute. So Judy kind of got us together because she opened a gallery and said, why don't we do a punk painter show? Because she knew I liked to paint.
Your family is indigenous, correct?
Half is, and half is Norwegian. So I'm definitely mixed. My mom was not Indian at all, and my dad was very much so. In fact, he ran a Title IV Indian education program in Spokane. So, yeah.
half of my family is Jewish, and I remember, as a teenager wanting to get in touch with that side of things.
For
Like that,
sure.
that was the time when that was most intense, probably right around my bar mitzvah. And it sounds like you might have been in a similar boat as far as the occupation of Alcatraz.
Absolutely. I wanted to be there. If history was going to happen with the Indian rights, I wanted to be front and center. And also, it wasn't something I grew up around because my mom and dad divorced when I was only 2.5. So we grew up in California, and all my family, Norwegian and Native, are all from Washington State.
Have you gone back and visited the sites that your family was from?
Yes, as a matter of fact, sure. Especially, as a young adult. I was able to do that and get in touch with my cousins. And now, we keep in touch I'm on Instagram. So some of my cousins I keep in touch with there. And I participated in some tribal things. I did artwork for the back of the Cowlitz language vocabulary cards. There's always a design on the back of a card. So I did that artwork, just whatever I can do. I've had cousins who are on the tribal council. So I try to participate a little bit.
It must have been exciting for them to have somebody from the tribe who was so prominent.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because for my cousins, it was a huge deal. But for the tribe itself, I'm not really sure because they have a casino and stuff. And for instance, I think it was 2 years ago now, might have been 3. I was, excuse me, I was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Native American Music Association. And my tribe hasn't really acknowledged me at all. So, I keep wondering when they'll ask me to do something or, record a promo or do anything like that. And I haven't, but, I don't live up there, and that's probably a big barrier. So I really didn't grow up, in that area. So, but the Isle name is pretty big around the area. I had cousins that were principals like at Leshai, which is a famous tribal leader in Washington, at his elementary school, named after him, stuff like that.
The last name it's a Native American name?
Yeah, my great-grandfather's full name was Iyall Wahawa, and our family shortened it to be like our family name.
At 16 years old, going to this, not just going to this occupation or this protest, but doing it, on a prison island or a former prison island, that must have been pretty overwhelming at that point.
I'm sort of shocked at how fearless I was. I just was hungry for experience, and I thought, I guess my mom kind of raised me pretty tough too. She was a veterinarian, so she was in a class of 102. There were 2 women who graduated as veterinarians in 1949 when she did. So she was a trailblazer. She was very intellectually curious. I read all the books she did, Siddhartha and Steppenwolf and Animal Farm, all that kind of stuff. Alan Watts. So whatever she was reading, I would read, and she just was very individual, pretty liberal, person. And we were raised. I remember when I wanted to go to Alcatraz, she said, "Well, I raised you. I guess I have to trust you." And so she let me go. I took the Greyhound bus from Fresno.
You were in the Bay at that point, and for those people who don't know California geography, that's a pretty far ride for a 16-year-old.
Yeah, and to get onto the island, I was in like a dinghy, a blow-up inflatable dinghy at night because you had to kind of sneak onto the island because, Coast Guard really wasn't encouraging people. And it was kind of rigorous. It was cold. I slept in the old guards' housing, and it was just these cement, very institutional, like probably 8-story buildings or whatever. And the foghorn would go off like every 90 seconds or something when you're trying to sleep. And the foghorn's like, 100 yards away from where you're sleeping, but it's designed to be loud. So I was just there about 4 or 5 days, just over Christmas vacation. What did I do on my Christmas vacation? I went to Alcatraz.
It's funny to be complaining about, how uncomfortable it was, because it's like, it's Alcatraz. That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, that's true.
How long were you there for?
Just about 4 or 5 days. I don't remember exactly.
I had seen or I had heard or read you discuss it before, and it sounded like it was kind of a turning point for you, that it, you sort of realized that maybe this isn't my scene.
Interesting. I don't know if I've ever said exactly those words. I did not feel like I totally belonged because I had such a suburban upbringing. But I would never say it wasn't really my scene. The political activism I was into, I might have felt a little isolated because, my tribal affiliation was pretty far away. And, the Bay Area tribes came from either the colleges, because some of the activists there were from the colleges, or, for instance, there were a lot of Native people that were Sioux that were. The men were recruited to work on the Golden Gate Bridge because they're so sure-footed. They were the same kind of workers that were building high-rises in New York City, as well as the Iroquois. So there was a whole movement to move Native people off the reservations to the Bay Area. So the Bay Area had a really big Native American population and scene and intertribal friendship house. There was, a whole social aspect, Native American Health Center, all this kind of things. Of course, I was down in Fresno, so, a little bit far from that, but when I could, I got involved. So
you remained involved in the protest scene.
Well, especially anti-war, Vietnam War, went to many, many, many marches and across San Francisco where I haven't looked up any of the statistics, but I would have to guess there were probably 20,000 people in some of those marches. It was, 4-lane wide street, like I think it was Fell or Oak Street, that we walked out from the Civic Center to Golden Gate Park. And as far as the eye could see were people marching. So you didn't see the beginning or the end at any point when you were in the middle. So a lot of people.
And I wonder how much punk eventually played sort of a similar role for you, because so definitely when we're, like I said before, I'm from Fremont, so I'm from a very suburban area, and I understand the drive to get to a city, to sort of, to embed yourself in a culture, but also realize that there are like people from outside of my suburban enclave who I have things in common with, and really find your group of people. And it sounds like for you, to a certain extent, punk would eventually play a similar or same role.
Absolutely. And so I was into poetry and art and things like that. And I was working at Indian Action Council preschool. So this was when I was in my early 20s. And the teacher that worked there was into rock from New York City. And he started finding out about the Ramones and Patti Smith, and he would buy their records. And so that's how I grew as a fan. And Patti Smith was a revelation to me because she was not trying to be, the beautiful femme musician or the, hot rocker chick. Any of that didn't have anything to do. It was outside of gender norms, what she was doing. She was just Patti, and her brain was just open to all kinds of ideas that wouldn't embrace those kind of conventions. And so I thought Patti Smith was kind of my role model as far as artistic or singing. And again, it's kind of like, do you mean it? Then you can sing it. It's not whether can you sing.
Yeah, but at a certain point, obviously, you realize that you could, in fact, sing.
Yeah, I kind of figured it all out. Growing up listening to music too, especially the era I grew up with, where you had Stevie Wonder and the Ronettes, and just all kinds of great bands on the AM radio all the time. Um, you grew up singing all these songs, so I ended up, hey, I do have a sense of melody and all that.
I mean, I know the Ronettes weren't Motown, but there is something about Motown or that soul music specifically that really just sort of kind of burrows its way into your subconscious, and it really sort of informs the way that you interact with music for the rest of your life.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, it sounds like you were very much emboldened by Patti Smith from the standpoint, and it's a similar sense that I get from a lot of people who specifically entered music through punk, and certainly in those early days was the sort of the removal of some of the gatekeeping that existed around music, that obviously before that too, and certainly that it's still probably even more, well, it's still the case these days that there are certain barriers of entry, right? In terms of certainly barriers of entry in terms of like, oh, if I'm going to make a living doing music, well, then I need to get on the radio and then I need to get on a major label. But to actually make that transition, to realize there's a big difference between enjoying music and singing music to yourself and actually being emboldened to stand up and do it on a stage in front of people.
Yeah, but I had seen Penelope from the Avengers, and I thought, she has something to say. Well, I have something to say. So I can write my own songs, And also, I really loved X-Ray Specs, so polystyrene. Oh, bondage up yours, Absolutely. I was enthusiastic about that attitude. Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned the X-Ray Specs, because I think one of the other connections there is you both had a prominent sax player, which is not something that was super common in the music at the time.
For sure. Benjamin Boss was amazing to our sound and really elevated us. Once we got Benjamin, things just came into focus, and we really had a voice that was really unique. And part of that was Benjamin's attitude and influence from jazz, being able to be spontaneous and really feel things. And he would really play off live how I was feeling in any given night. His playing would change depending on how I was delivering the lyric that night. Because some lyrics, even though the melody stays the same, one night you're saying them a little bit more mournfully. Another night you're saying them more triumphantly. Another night you're saying like whistling in the dark, So he could feel those things and articulate them in his little solo sections and his, melodic responses to the vocal when we were on stage. It was really a powerful, he was a powerful partner with me as the voice of Romeo Void.
That's an interesting point that I haven't actually heard discussed much, but obviously if you're in a band, for the most part, certainly if you're in a kind of a more traditional band and you've got a couple of albums or, you're touring on an album, you are effectively playing the same songs night after night. And it can get a little repetitious, but I like that perspective. It's really interesting the way in which it sounds like you were really bringing your life, bringing your mood, bringing wherever you were on a given day into the performance.
I feel like that's what good singers do. Because you can't really hide in a vocal too much and be effective. If you're being honest, you're being open, and people are feeling what you're singing. And well, at least the powerful singers that I enjoy listening to all have that quality of being really tuned in to themselves and able to express that. And then that's what touches people.
Maybe it came fairly naturally to you, but was there a certain point when you really felt the confidence that you could really kind of give your all? I mean, there's something, making art in front of people is vulnerable just on the face of it. You know, playing music is vulnerable on the face of it, but to me, there's something next level about singing that is just one of the most vulnerable things that you can do in front of a large group of people. And it seems like something that it takes an incredible amount of confidence to be able to do. And, you know, perhaps that's something that you have to work up to over time.
I think because of being a brown girl at mostly very white schools, of being a fat girl among more slender population, I got the confidence to just be myself way younger, because it was either that or get beat down by it. And there was nothing in my life or my upbringing that said you should validate others' opinion of who you are. You know, my mom valued her opinion of who she was, and so she went out to do what she wanted to do. And that was what was modeled for me. You need to do that no matter what people might say about you or think about you. And also that whole concept of like, don't give people the power to shut you down if you have something to say. And I don't know. I mean, it helped me even before doing music or performing to have that attitude. It might have got me in trouble with the administrators at my schools. I did end up quitting high school because I just don't fit in. You know, this is not going to be for me. This experience cannot work for another couple of years. So, but then I started going to college. I rode my bike over to the college, Fresno State, and I didn't even apply to the school. I just went to the classes. I got a schedule and I showed up at the class. First day of class, I was like, I want to take your class. Well, are you registered? No, I'm not registered, and I'm not going to register. I just want to be here and learn. So it was always to kind of be of use to myself.
Really interesting to hear you say that, because I do think that there is there's a sense that a lot, maybe even most people at this point approach college, which is they need something quantifiable to get out of it. And for most people, it's a degree or you know, it's some sort of insight or a very specific skill set for a very specific job that you plan on having afterwards. What, being at Fresno State and you know, not being enrolled and not, you know, worrying about getting those credits, what was it that you were getting out of the experience?
Poetry. There were lots of Fresno poets. Philip Levine was one of the national poets at the time, and he was from Fresno, but there were a lot of other poets around there, and there was a lot of, you know, the Bay Area influence of all the beat poets, and Allen Ginsberg. I saw him performing in my youth, and Denise Levertov, and the writers that the professors at Fresno State were turning me on to were, you know, very contemporary free verse. And I also took a women in literature class. I got exposed to a lot of, you know, female authors and things like that. So I was always about the culture.
There's something really interesting about San Francisco and the beats, which is, I don't know, maybe this might not be the case anymore. Obviously, San Francisco has changed a lot in the past, you know, decade and a half. And I would say probably, as somebody from the area, probably not for the better. But when I was growing up, you know, in the 90s, I you know, whether it was Vesuvia or walking into City Lights, you know, I walked into City Lights a few times, and like Lawrence Ferlinghetti was just there talking to people. And it felt like the city still had a tangible connection to that scene. It still felt was certainly not as vibrant, but it still kind of felt alive in the intervening decades.
Absolutely.
Did you have, I guess, expectations that poetry might be something that you might be able to do professionally?
I don't think at the time I thought, I still don't.
You've got sense, it's a very hard thing to do professionally. I mean, music, don't get me wrong, music is also extremely hard, but poetry is sort of next level.
Yeah, I think I was always just willing to have a job, when I was going to school, unenrolled after I quit high school, on the weekends I worked up in Yosemite as a maid. There was a bus you could get on to go work for the weekend at City College. You just go show up and go work. And so I was always willing to have a job. I worked in grocery stores. I was a maid. I worked in a head shop. I ended up working in a health facility as a medical assistant, so I was always just willing to have a job. I think perhaps my mom would have liked it if I wanted to be a professional like she was, but it just wasn't my thing. And even though I was completely exposed to medicine, it was never a goal of mine to join medicine as, to do it for a job.
So it sounds like the most important thing, or at least the immediate goal, was that you were able to do what you can to sustain yourself in order to make the art and just enjoy, I guess, the process of making things.
Absolutely. And Romeo Void was like that too. We didn't want to make it in the music business. We never even considered that. We weren't styling ourselves on rock stars. We had something to say. We wanted to say it. We had a community for sure in San Francisco, and, places to play, after hours clubs, Mabuhay Gardens. And what's interesting about the release is you can hear the beginnings of who Romeo Void would be, even though we're not all the way there yet. Benjamin, at the time of this recording, had only been in the band, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. So he was just starting to integrate with the songs we had already written when he wasn't around. And so hearing that now, I'm so grateful that I had these musicians who gave me the stage to experiment with what I could create within a song with lyrics and singing and vocalizing. I didn't even understand the difference between a verse and a bridge and a chorus. Was not musically trained whatsoever. And yet, they'd come up with the chords and we'd figure it out during rehearsal. And we would create in rehearsal. I would have a notebook, with tons of phrases, maybe some poems. And then while they're making the chord changes, I'd start trying to figure out how to put them all together into what were verses and what's the hook line going to be, the chorus. We had to kind of figure some of that out. And especially on that first record, it isn't always extremely identifiable from a musical point of view or a lyrical point of view. What is the chorus of this song? And I hear that now and I'm like, applaud it, because it was a lot to have the musicians just do that, and be willing to go there. And I consider it very generous of them with their time to, sort of allow me to be in there making it happen. Of course, for them, I was always like the cheerleader. We can do this, anybody can. We would accept gigs, at warehouses after hours, after the clubs closed down, stuff like that. And they'd be like, where are we going? And I'm like, well, it's way out by the wharfs. And, a lot of kids from the Art Institute will be there because, it was quite a little scene there. And they'd like load up their cars and haul those amplifiers up the stairs. It was a lot for them to participate in that with me.
I don't care where you're from. You never want to hear the phrase "out by the wharfs." Just, down by the docks is always, that's a troubling phrase.
Yeah, Hunter's Point was the name of the area where where artists had their studios, so that's where the parties would be, after hours. So
when you first crossed paths with these guys, did you feel like an outsider? All these people who did kind of bring some form of musical training or musicality to the table?
Not really, because Frank and I started the band together, the bass player. And so it was pretty much over the summer when him and I got together, because I was working in the video studio for the performance department in the art school. And he was working for the gallery installing this big elaborate Alice Aycock show. And so we got together like at lunch and stuff, and maybe after we got off work, whatever our hours were, and he had a bass guitar, and a drum machine. And I was like, hey, maybe you can help me do some performance pieces. So some of the first things we did together is I would write lyrics and he would write bass parts for me to do this action on video, but also have this music happening. And then pretty soon it was like, well, let's just get Peter involved. And I was in this band called the Mummers and Poppers that was sort of like, I don't know if you ever saw that movie back in the day called The Commitments, but it was all these English people doing sort of Motown and lots of, oldies, but like a real dance atmosphere. And the band I was in was called the Mummers and Poppers, and there was a lead singer for that, Billy Bastiani. And so I was one of the backup singers, me and my friend Rachel, who was later in the Units. Her and I were singing backup. We had lead on a couple songs, but mostly we sang backup. And so, there'd be like 7 of us on stage having a great time. And we kind of wanted to transform the punk experience that we'd been into and going to, the clubs, into something a little more playful and more fun. And let's start dancing again. And let's not just be all detached, leaning against the wall,
I was asking about the confidence earlier, but it sounds like that's the perfect on-ramp to be sort of a backup for somebody else on a stage with, 6 or 7 other people. That's a great way to start on stage.
And Rachel and I were kind of a unit. Like, we would make clothes so we looked like we were supposed to be together, That was the fun of it. And then when I started my own band, it was just like, I had the same kind of attitude. Let's just get up and do it. Let's shake some action, so to speak.
I wonder if there's an extent to which not having expectations is kind of a superpower when it comes to playing music.
I never could have said it like that, but absolutely, yes.
With that in mind, were you blindsided when Never Say Never became what it was?
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. When Romeo Void really got more success, it was shocking in a way, because, we'd been playing, even the first couple of tours were in small clubs with scenes that happened to them. But by the time we did Never Say Never, and and then again with Girl in Trouble, we were playing like colleges, so we were playing not scenes, not clubs, but, bigger venues. And I'd look out at the audience and I'd be like, you're the kids that hated me in high school. Why are you at my show? So there was there was some definite fear involved in having to be in that world, and some trepidation. And certainly with the, administration of the duties of the record label, there was just a, total clash of culture, with the A&R guys and all that, promotion people.
I sort of think in the same way, as I was saying, that having no expectations is a superpower. I think probably early on, when you're in a scene, full full of like-minded bands to a certain extent. There is a way in which there is power in not looking like everyone, in that at very least, like, it's a way to stand out. But then at least back then, this is probably again still the case now, but at least back then there was a ceiling to that, as far as the, major label record companies don't want to take risks, right? They know what has worked from them in the past, and they want to keep doing that. And when you present something to them that's different, even if it's just, hey, I look different, they're not really willing to take a risk on that.
Even if they're the ones who courted you. That's what was weird, is that we were offered different deals. Howie from 415 Records ended up selling us to Columbia because Columbia would take all of his artists and his entire label. But we had already been talking to Elektra, which we thought would be more of an artist's label, which, it certainly has been in the past, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, etc. And then that decision wasn't really ours to give because we were owned by 415 at that point. And he said later at a conference I heard him speaking that he felt like he fed Romeo Void into a meat grinder. And he kind of did. Yeah.
It's a very vivid metaphor. What did being fed into a meat grinder look like for you in the band?
Well, different feelings, but for instance, I remember, we got lucky to get this great booking agent out of New York. And then you go backstage, you're playing with the Bush Tetras, who you love. And you go backstage and the booking agent is passed out on Quaaludes in your dressing room. And you're like, this is what we were aspiring to be with these guys? I mean, none of us would be ever passed out in the dressing room on Quaaludes, but the people who work for record labels in those days, that was, or booking agents, that's something that would happen. And the other thing was their total disapproval of, my looks. And it's like, well, you signed us, you knew what we look like. So come on now. It hasn't changed. So yeah, it was just, and then, okay, so another instance that happened too is that when you're out promoting your record, and we were promoting Instincts for A Girl in Trouble, and we get to New York after touring all the way across the country. We get to New York and we go up into it was called the Black Box at that point. It's Columbia Records, this big black building, Black Rock is what they called it actually. And you go up there, and all over the walls of the hallways, is Patti Smythe, because I Am the Warrior is coming out. And suddenly it's like, okay, no wonder we're not seeing the promotion people backstage anymore, because this is what they're banking on now, and we're over for them.
You do 3 LPs. You have two of them are on Columbia, and 2 in a row. You've scored pretty big hits off of them. For things that just sort of end the way they did, I was going to ask whether you were done with them or they were done with you, but I think you kind of answered that question.
Yeah, they never say never happened because of Howie and 415. We got the bulk of our sales for that record. Initially, the first 70,000 that were sold caught their attention to Want Us. And that was on Howie. He had a map of the United States up in his office, and he would map all of our tour, and the other bands that were on his label map their tours. And there's a note across the top, all bands on tour at all times. And he was on the phone. We were doing interviews every college radio station. So we were entwined with college radio quite a bit, actually. And a lot of our success was due to the activity at college radio stations and their enthusiasm for Romeo Void, not commercial radio. We were on very few commercial stations. In LA, we were on K Rock. I'm not sure we got played much on KSAN ever. No, we weren't.
At any point, not just the beginning.
Right, exactly. We were never a KSAN. We weren't Journey. Or Y&T.
MTV MTV kind of comes along later in that, but I mean that does that? Well, no, I guess MTV was 83.
Yeah, we were on MTV. We were one of the earliest bands on MTV.
That's a boost in that that is nationwide, but at the same time, if it's a problem, if the label has a problem with how you look, that's only going to be exacerbated by having music videos.
Yeah, but I'll have to tell you, the fans find you because they like it. It was never the fans that didn't like Romeo Void. It was the system. Yeah. I mean, our fans were like us, or aspired to be, or, yeah. Our fans definitely were excited by who we were and what we were doing. And I've had so many people over the years, I was this little Chicano girl in Texas, and then I saw you on MTV, and I realized I could do, la, la, la. I heard that a lot. And from gay people, because, San Francisco's so gay friendly, we had plenty of gay friends, great gay staff on, who worked for our band. Lots of gays in the punk scene, gay band members and all that. So our audience was never the barrier. It was the gatekeepers of the labels.
Finally 40 years later, there's such a big push for representation in that way. And there were so many people that and I don't know if this is just something nobody ever realized or nobody really cared about, but there were so many sort of unaddressed parts of the population, untargeted parts of the population that you were able to speak to because you look different.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the best example, but looking at somebody like Lizzo, for example, obviously it would have been nicer if it still happened while you were around, but it must be nice sort of seeing that play out to a certain extent the way it is.
And she's amazing. She's so talented. She's so courageous. Talk about confidence.
If I had 1/1000th of that, I would probably have a very different life and career.
Yeah.
How did you get into teaching?
Well, I started teaching adults first because I learned printmaking, and then I got my own press. So I was teaching adults etching and lino cut. And then I got invited to teach in some schools. One of the first schools I taught in was the Native American Charter School in Oakland. And after doing a lot of school things, I started taking more and more of those little, at the time they were like part-time contract jobs, like you come once a week for 6 weeks, that kind of artist in residency. After doing an artist in residency for, probably about 6 years or so. And then I transferred that when I moved down to the desert. I started working, for the Riverside Arts Council doing artist in residence. I did that quite a bit down in Southern California. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? Maybe I should go back to school and let the kids come to me. Because I had a trunk full of art supplies. I'd be hauling all over, the lower part of the state, going from Victorville and Apple Valley out to Coachella and down into San Bernardino. In a period of 3 days, I'd be teaching in all those locations. So it was practical at that point for me to just go ahead and I enjoyed doing it. I think there's something really exciting about, because they're all about change. Things are changing for them all the time anyway. So seeing them change and embrace the changes that happen to them when they start creating art and having the confidence, there's that word again, to express themselves and have that recognized and understand the feeling of art making and art processes. It was wonderful, and it was different than teaching adults who actually had way more fear about their skills and representation and things like that. Certainly when I was an art teacher, I would try to design assignments based on the processes and the materials so that things would look cool, even if you didn't know how to draw. And so I sort of ended up specializing. I named it myself, but I was the Art 1 specialist at the high school where I just ended my career working after 9 years there. Because I enjoyed, if you're only going to have one art teacher, it should be me. Because I'm going to show you all the things I know how to do, but I'm here for you to experience this. And if you just experience it 1 year in your high school education, it's going to be good. And you will be able to transfer some of the visual literacy that I'm going to teach you how to talk about things and notice things. You can transfer those skills to lots of other places. And the fact that I really encourage people to be creators, not consumers. It's very easy to be a consumer. That's what you're always doing. Instead, let's take the reins and create things. And also, creators tend to, inventors get paid. And if you learn anything and you're really good at it, you can get paid for it. So it's practical in a way, too. And especially like in California and actually in America, our artistic output is what is desired by so much of the world.
You use the phrase "when I ended my career," which sounds very definite. Is that chapter of your life over?
Teaching public school. I'm thinking of doing some Zoom classes for adults again. And there's an organization here in town that I very well may get involved in down the road. I'm not ready yet. That is an after school arts program that happens in a storefront here. And that's the kind of thing I would love to be involved in, or special populations, foster kids or people having drug and alcohol counseling, that sort of thing. More like that kind of situation where it's really art is healing and art is medicine. I'm very interested in those kind of things where you use art as a tool to grow and heal and communicate and empower yourself. That's what I'm interested in, rather than be a part of the art scene. So I'm still that way. I go visit museums. I love museums. They have so many of the people that I've always been interested at them. But I don't consider wanting to break into the art world as an artist in that way at all.
Art 1, day 1, lesson 1. What's the first thing that you teach?
Ooh, I would have to say to be spontaneous and see something out of nothing. So one of the first things I have kids do is they're called exquisite corpse drawings, where you fold over the paper and you do one section, I'll do the head, and you tell the kids, have it be outrageous, add texture, add horns, or goopy eyes, or, anything you can think of, spiky hair. Really think about the textures of things. And it could be a monster. It doesn't have to be a human being. And so then, say, you do the head, the next person does from the neck to the waist, next person does the waist to the knees, next person does the feet. That's a table activity. You finally get yours back. You open it up. You see what it looks like. Because you've been leaving little marker marks along the fold so people know where to continue the figure. And then it's your job to paint it and give it a background. That's one of the very first projects I always did in my art classes. And it makes it fun. It's community oriented. You sit and talk at your table. You get surprised. All the good things.